Picture your family staring at empty cupboards with nothing but a sack of flour and a few potatoes to last the week. How many days could you keep everyone fed before hope started running out? Nearly 100 years ago, more than 15 million Americans found themselves without work after the financial system collapsed beneath their feet. Entire households learned to survive on root vegetables, dried legumes, hardened bread, and preserved meats that could sit on a shelf for months. It feels like something buried in dusty history books, yet as grocery costs climb higher, shopping receipts grow longer, and regular people start calculating every item before it lands in the cart. Those long-forgotten kitchen tricks suddenly carry fresh relevance. A birthday cake whipped together with 0 eggs, a dessert pie built almost entirely from water, a simmering pot of soup fashioned out of vegetable scraps, bones, and starchy potato water. One small tin of processed meat transformed into morning eggs, midday sandwiches, and evening rice bowls. These are not merely dozen-old dishes somebody dug out of a museum archive. These are dozen proof points showing how everyday folks converted scarcity into something resembling abundance on their dinner plates. And the item sitting in the top position might completely shift the way you view your own pantry shelves today. Number 12 brings us something called crazy cake. There is something deeply peculiar about existence during the Depression era. Even after every dollar vanished and the bank accounts emptied, children still craved birthday celebrations identical to every other kid they knew. They still wanted to puff out candles, tug out the inaugural slice, and grab hold of a single joyful memory inside a house where each cent carried the weight of a brick. The obstacle was straightforward enough. Most mothers possessed 0 eggs, 0 milk, and 0 butter on the shelves. Still, somebody engineered a formula that bordered on miraculous. People named it crazy cake, sometimes called wacky cake, depending on which county you ask. The crazy part came from the fact that this cocoa dessert bypassed 3 items nearly everyone believed were absolutely mandatory for baking. Instead, the recipe pulled together plain flour, granulated sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, a splash of vinegar, a modest pour of cooking oil, and cold water. The real genius hid inside the technique. No extra mixing bowls or specialized equipment needed. Straight inside the baking tin, cooks dug 3 shallow depressions into the mound of dry goods. One hollow for vinegar, another for oil, and a third for vanilla extract if the bottle still held anything. Then they drizzled water across everything, stirred softly until combined, and slid the pan into a hot oven. When sodium bicarbonate collides with acidic vinegar, it unleashes gas bubbles that lift the batter skyward without requiring any egg proteins. It was a tiny chemistry maneuver, though during genuine hardship, tiny chemistry maneuvers could salvage a child's entire birthday. Modern routines do not mirror the year 1933 precisely, but a growing number of households are starting to recognize the sensation of double-checking price tags before something enters the grocery basket. The moment eggs, butter, and milk all demand more from your wallet than they once did. A formula that calls for absolutely none of those ingredients abruptly stops feeling like an antique curiosity. It starts feeling like common sense. What elevates this cake further is the reality that it is not simply affordable. It holds moisture remarkably well over time. Covered with a clean kitchen towel or tucked inside a sealed container, it maintains tenderness for multiple days without drying out. It does not demand frosting. A dusting of confectioner's sugar, a smear of fruit preserves, or even a naked square of cocoa cake supplies enough sweetness to make the final course feel noteworthy. That genuine motivation explains why crazy cake has persisted across so many decades. It is not the most elegant cake ever pulled from an oven. It is not the prettiest. It stands for something humans have always tried to protect amid turbulent seasons, a fragment of ordinary life. So when you notice more neighbors searching online for formulas skipping eggs, milk, and butter, do not dismiss it as merely another viral baking fad. It could signal that household kitchens are beginning to crunch the same survival arithmetic they worked through during the Great Depression. Sometimes history does not announce its return with sirens or screaming newspaper headlines. Occasionally it slips back in, carrying the aroma of melted chocolate, a touch of vinegar, a splash of water, and hope slowly expanding inside an old metal baking pan. Let me pose a question right here. If every egg, every drop of milk, and every stick of butter suddenly vanished from your kitchen tonight, would you still find a way to bake a birthday cake for your child? Number 11 delivers water pie. If somebody approached you claiming they could construct a pie employing practically nothing beyond plain water, you would likely assume they were pulling your leg. Zero milk, zero eggs, zero fruit filling, zero custard cream, just water, granulated sugar, all-purpose flour, and a small knob of butter or lard if any remained tucked away inside the house. Yet during the hard years of the Depression, nobody was laughing. This was dessert for countless struggling families. Water pie did not appear during pantry abundance. It surfaced when a mother swung open the cupboard and confronted the gut-punch realization that she lacked sufficient supplies to produce a legitimate fruit pie. No apples for an apple pastry, no lemons, no fresh milk for a creamy center, zero eggs to deliver richness. Yet she still hungered to place something sweet before the household once supper concluded. The formula for water pie bordered on unbelievable in its bare-bones simplicity. A prepared pastry shell plus a filling constructed from water, sugar, flour, and a modest pat of butter. During the baking process, the flour particles absorbed surrounding liquid while the sugar dissolved completely, and the butter contributed a whisper of luxurious texture. Gradually, the mixture firmed into a soft, jiggly custard-like interior. It reads like an impossibility, yet that represented the quiet brilliance of a kitchen running on fumes. The objective was never crafting an award-winning showpiece. The objective was safeguarding the ritual that supper still possessed a proper ending. A slender triangle of pie did not pad anyone's bank balance, though it allowed a household to sense that existence had not fully surrendered its warmth and self-respect. Many household cooks dusted cinnamon, nutmeg, or dark brown sugar across the top to gift it the fragrance of a fancier pastry. One crucial pointer involved permitting the pie to cool entirely before drawing a knife through it. Slice while scorching hot and the center would ooze across the plate. Let it rest at room temperature and it would set into something tender, sugary, and convincing enough to pass as genuine dessert. Nowadays, the recipe lands on modern ears almost like a folk legend. But when grocery costs ascend and every supermarket run ends, with returning several items to the shelf, formulas calling for the fewest possible components regain their logic. Water pie does not represent the kind of showpiece you craft to wow the neighbors. It represents the kind you craft to survive months when each individual dollar carries disproportionate weight. And if water pie ever begins reappearing across more supper tables moving forward, the striking element will not be how peculiar the formula appears. The striking element will be how many individuals finally grasp why their grandparents had no alternative but to create it. Can you genuinely picture a pie manufactured mostly from plain water once placing smiles around an entire family's faces after the evening meal? Number 10 highlights humble potato soup. During prosperous stretches, potatoes function as nothing more than a forgettable side offering. Yet when supermarket bills begin stretching past reach, they transform into the starring attraction. That explains why potatoes populated kitchens nationwide across the entire Depression period. When meat prices soared too high, eggs required strict rationing, and dairy was not reliably available, potatoes remained standing. They demanded zero specialized storage conditions. They did not rot overnight. They did not require a sprawling ingredient list. With nothing beyond a blade, a stock pot, and a modest stretch of time, several potatoes could morph into supper for a whole household. On a frosty winter evening, a grandmother might begin by slicing an onion and softening it in leftover cooking fat or whatever butter remained. Within a few short minutes, the gentle perfume of sizzling onions would drift through the cramped kitchen, blending with the slender curls of steam lifting from the stovetop. Next arrived potato chunks, cold water, a shake of salt, a crack of black pepper, all left to burble unhurriedly. The enchantment lived inside the potatoes themselves. There was zero demand for heavy cream or costly thickening agents. The innate starch from the potatoes bled gradually into the surrounding broth, constructing a soup that landed as rich, steamy, and substantial, far more generous than the modest pile of ingredients would indicate. Thrifty cooks deployed another trick, too. They reserved celery fronds, leftover carrot rounds, or even a chunk of dried bread to toss into the simmering pot. Not from preference, but from the understanding that every scrap contained worth and discarding anything was an unthinkable luxury. A generous kettle of potato soup could satisfy 6 hungry people, and if any remained the following day, reheating often deepened the taste. Certain families even mashed the leftover spuds and reshaped them into a fried side for the next meal, squeezing value from every last spoonful. Right now, as the cost of meat, eggs, and endless other staples continues its unpredictable dance, potatoes still occupy the identical function they performed nearly a century ago. Affordable, satiating, effortless to partner with almost anything, and consistently soothing. Perhaps that is precisely why, during strained economic periods, shopping carts tend to pile high with potatoes long before they see beef roasts or cheese blocks. A potato does not whisper promises of extravagance, though it can deliver a steaming cauldron of soup, the scent of onions wafting through the house, and the quiet reassurance that everyone will still convene around the dinner surface tonight. During inflationary stretches, the most precious meal is not the priciest one on the menu. It is the one capable of filling every stomach for the smallest possible sum. Number 9 introduces leftover soup, sometimes called perpetual soup. A well-worn saying echoed through countless Depression-era kitchens. The garbage pail should never eat more generously than the family does. It raises a chuckle, yet that straightforward principle shepherded millions of individuals through some of the most brutal years this country has witnessed. Back in that era, a bone was never discarded after the meal concluded. It was banked like a miniature investment toward tomorrow's pot. Carrot peels, celery tops, onion ends, water left from boiling potatoes, slightly limp vegetables past their prime, and tiny shreds of meat still clinging stubbornly to the joint were all mindfully stashed aside. No one knew with certainty what they would manage to buy the following day. The moment the container of saved scraps reached capacity, dinner essentially began cooking itself. Everything tumbled into a sizable stockpot with fresh water and was left to burble gently for hours. The bones leached out deep, savory character, while the potato water delivered starch that helped provide body to the broth. Those small fragments of produce added flavor depth and nutritional content without demanding a single extra cent. That is why so many called it the soup that refuses to end. A handful of carrot bits today, some greens tomorrow, leftover meat morsels the day after that. The flavor profile morphed from one evening to the next, though the mission stayed locked in place: keep the kitchen hearth warm and confirm every mouth got fed. What makes this particularly fascinating is that this entire philosophy now carries a thoroughly contemporary label: zero-waste cooking. Professional chefs describe it as a circular kitchen where every ingredient is utilized to its absolute limit. For our grandparents, however, it was simply the mechanics of daily existence when waste was not merely discouraged, but genuinely impossible. Even individuals who plan seriously for long-duration emergencies recognize the identical principle. During rocky periods, the greatest leverage does not arrive from purchasing additional supplies. It arrives from exploiting what you already possess with sharper intelligence. Perhaps that is why leftover soup never truly qualified as a meal rooted in deprivation. It qualified as a meal rooted in sharp-minded resourcefulness, because sometimes the most effective money-saving tactic is not buying less of what you need. It is glancing at a carrot peel, a stripped soup bone, or a bowl of cloudy potato water and silently asking yourself, can I reshape this into tomorrow night's family dinner? Number 8 lands on the classic pairing of rice and beans. If Depression-era household managers trusted any single investment category above all others, it was not precious metals or stock certificates. It was a humble sack of dried legumes because they internalized a brutally simple equation: spend the absolute minimum and extract the absolute maximum in return. An inexpensive bag of dried beans possessed the capacity to nourish a full household through multiple consecutive meals. The entire process required submerging them overnight in water, then relocating them to a cooking pot the next morning along with fresh water, sliced onions, and a bit of salt before allowing everything to burble slowly for hours. Throughout countless Southern households, a pot of beans would land on the stove early in the morning while mother tackled laundry, scrubbed floors, and permitted supper to effectively cook itself across the daylight hours. Once the beans turned fork tender, a generous scoop beside a mound of steaming white rice was sufficient to supply a satiating meal loaded with energy and plant protein for the entire family unit. The intriguing angle is that this meal operates somewhat like compound interest in edible form. A modest upfront investment keeps generating greater value as time rolls forward. A single measuring cup of dried beans expands to multiple times its original volume once fully hydrated and cooked. Fold in a bit of rice and the meal's total value multiplies even further. If the household happened to possess a scrap of salt pork, a leftover ham bone, or some caramelized onions, the entire pot immediately grew significantly more flavorful while barely increasing the total expenditure. That same dynamic explains why rice and beans appear embedded in cuisines spanning virtually every continent. Not because they represent impoverished people's fare, but because they represent intelligent people's fuel. It stands as the meal of individuals who grasp that a sharp kitchen does not cry out for additional money. It demands that every ingredient punch above its weight class. Individuals who construct long-haul food reserves understand this principle at a bone-deep level. Dried legumes always earn honored positions inside the pantry because they store beautifully, endure for extended periods, and harmonize with almost any grain, vegetable, or seasoning left rolling around the kitchen shelves. Here is a pointer that homemakers have handed down across generations. Discard the soaking water and employ fresh liquid for the actual cooking process. Then toss in a bay leaf or a chunk of onion to assist the beans in cooking uniformly while developing deeper flavor. A sizable batch can also be portioned into smaller containers and stretched across an entire week's menu. Rice and beans were never solely about filling bellies. They delivered a financial tutorial served straight from a battered cooking vessel. Because during times of economic uncertainty, the investment yielding the highest return is not always parked inside a bank vault. Occasionally, it is parked inside a burlap sack of dried beans and a cloth bag of rice that can be converted into dozens of steamy, comforting meals for every person seated around your table. Number 7 spotlights cornbread alongside pinto beans. If you wished to capture the soundtrack of a Southern kitchen nearly 100 years ago, you would not detect any blender motors or microwave beeps. You would catch the crackle of firewood inside a cast-iron stove, a kettle of beans murmuring softly all afternoon, and ultimately the crisp sound of a blade slicing through the golden brown crust of a fresh tray of cornbread. That specific noise signaled that supper stood ready. 0 steak, 0 roast chicken, solely a pot of simmering pinto beans accompanied by a pan of golden cornbread. However, for laboring families scattered across the South throughout the Great Depression, that modest spread was sufficient to propel them through another demanding day. The pinto beans received an overnight soak, then slow-cooked alongside onions, a modest measure of salt, and if fortune smiled, a small hunk of salt pork or a ham bone that saturated the entire kitchen with a deep, meaty fragrance. Simultaneously, the cornbread was crafted from stone-ground cornmeal, water, or perhaps milk if any was spared, and whatever cooking fat happened to be lingering in the house, yielding a crust that cracked crisply on the outside yet stayed tender within. The optimal consumption method was also the least complicated. Tear away a wedge of warm cornbread, submerge it into the thick bean pot liquor, and let it absorb the earthy richness of the legumes, plus the faint smoky whisper from the cooking pot. A dirt-cheap meal abruptly felt remarkably satisfying. What elevates this story further is that supper did not mark the conclusion. If leftovers survived the evening, the cornbread would be sliced the next morning and pan-fried in a smear of grease until bronzed and crunchy, then plated alongside the remaining beans or perhaps a single fried egg. Absolutely nothing got pitched into the waste bin, and plenty of folks would argue it actually tasted superior on the second round. When meat costs escalate and grocery budgets constrict, meals constructed around legumes and cornmeal quit being dusty memories and become practical strategies again. They remain inexpensive, deeply filling, and capable of satisfying a crowd. Perhaps that explains why this particular meal has endured through successive generations. It was never invented to dazzle anyone. It was invented to fuel human beings who labored from sunrise until the sky turned pitch black. And somewhere amid the snapping firewood, the slow simmering beans, and the aroma of fresh cornbread drifting through the house, people uncovered a quiet truth. Abundance does not exclusively flow from costly ingredients. Occasionally it flows from an aged wooden table where every person possesses a bowl of steaming beans and a wedge of cornbread to soak up every remaining trace. Number 6 showcases lentil soup, Just a single pound of dried lentils holds the capacity to supply enough portions to carry a small household through nearly 2 days when matched with rice or crusty bread. That qualifies as a remarkable return from something as unassuming as a handful of tiny legumes. Lentils do not broadcast an irresistible aroma across the grocery aisle. They do not sport vivid colors that catch the eye. Truth be told, most shoppers stride directly past them without sparing a second glance. However, if you study the nutritional arithmetic rather than the external packaging, lentils operate almost like a meal manufacturing engine. 1 pound of dried lentils generates multiple generous servings, sufficient to assist a compact household across roughly 48 hours. What renders them even more practical is the reality that unlike numerous other legumes, lentils demand zero overnight soaking. Simply rinse them under cool water, tip them into a pot alongside water, onions, carrots, or whichever vegetables happen to be loitering in the refrigerator drawer, and simmer for approximately 30 to 40 minutes. That brief window proves adequate to produce a complete kettle of soup. This explains why countless homemakers regarded lentils as the emergency backup plan whenever the monthly budget began tightening its grip. One straightforward trick elevates the final flavor noticeably. Splash a few drops of vinegar or a squeeze of lemon juice into the pot after the cooking wraps up instead of at the beginning. The acid brightens the overall profile considerably, though adding it prematurely can cause the lentils to toughen and resist softening. Perhaps most remarkable is the nutritional payload. Lentils arrive packed with plant-based protein, loaded with dietary fiber, and remarkably effective at curbing hunger. Match them with a hunk of bread or a mound of rice, and you land on a balanced plate costing only a sliver of what comparable meat-centered meals demand. Perhaps that is why lentils tend to stage a quiet comeback whenever conditions grow difficult. No splashy advertising, no influencer buzz. No one rushes home breathless to show off a pound of lentils. But when individuals begin calculating every dollar inside the shopping cart, they start waking up to their genuine worth. Lentil soup makes no attempt to be the most electrifying dish resting on the dinner surface. It executes a single job with quiet competence, converting a compact, affordable, shelf-stable ingredient into multiple hot meals that are nutritious, deeply satisfying, and capable of shepherding a family through unpredictable economic seasons. Because during hard stretches, the authentic hero at the table is not the food you crave most intensely. It is the food that keeps you full the longest while demanding the least from your wallet. Number 5 introduces Sloppy Joe sandwiches. There existed an odd species of arithmetic that numerous mothers mastered during the Great Depression. 1 pound of ground beef, combined with a fistful of rolled oats, a scattering of breadcrumbs, and somehow the equation did not yield 4 individual servings. It delivered 8 hot sandwiches sufficient for a household packed with hungry children. The entire affair sounds more akin to a stage magician's illusion than a legitimate recipe. Yet that stood as the hidden mechanics beneath the Sloppy Joe. Inside sizable families, meat was no longer positioned as the anchor of the plate. It was repurposed as the flavoring agent. A modest quantity of ground beef was browned alongside chopped onions, tomato sauce, and seasonings until fragrant, then extended with oats or breadcrumbs. Those cheap filler ingredients absorbed the savory, tangy sauce completely, swelling the filling until it was thicker, more voluminous, and still delivering robust, meaty satisfaction. Then arrived the scene that made the entire exercise worthwhile. The youngsters queued up around the table, balancing paper plates in their small hands. One piped up, asking whether seconds would be available. Another sank their teeth in and instantly wound up with sauce smeared across both cheeks like war paint. Meanwhile, Mother stood stationed beside the stove, dolloping filling onto soft sandwich buns while quietly tallying heads to confirm every child received their portion. This meal could silence an entire roomful of children for several precious minutes. The Sloppy Joe was never elegant, but it stretched an entire month's budget. One oversized skillet could crank out a heap of servings at a cost dramatically lower than giving everyone their own slab of meat. The trick was letting it rest a few minutes so the oats and breadcrumbs could drink up the sauce. Sometimes a mother's greatest triumph wasn't presenting a flawless dinner. It was scanning that table, spotting a sandwich clutched in every child's grip, and hearing precisely nobody ask if there was anything else to eat. A miserly portion of meat that could never satisfy 4 individuals on its own was combined with last night's leftover rice. Breadcrumbs stepped in to lock moisture inside while simultaneously boosting total volume. Then the entire mixture was packed firmly into a hollowed bell pepper and slid into the oven to bake. Suddenly, every person stationed around the table sensed they owned their own complete, self-contained meal. No one needed to divide a portion, and no one had to surrender their rightful share to another hungry mouth. This is why some observers label stuffed peppers as America's earliest version of meal prepping. Long before the trendy term ever surfaced, each pepper functioned like a ready-made portable lunchbox. Numerous peppers could be baked simultaneously, stashed inside the icebox, and reheated for lunch or supper the following day. In practice, the flavor frequently deepened and improved after the rice had additional time to drink in the surrounding sauce. The pepper's natural sugars continued developing and sweetening as it rested. One piece of guidance passed faithfully across generations, warned against cramming the filling too densely. Leaving a small pocket of empty space permits steam to circulate properly. This helps the rice grains remain tender while guarding against a dried-out, unappealing center. Maybe the most beautiful dimension of this dish is not its vivid color palette. It is the manner in which a small quantity of food is made to feel entirely sufficient. A lone bell pepper offered quiet proof that sharp-witted resourcefulness can, at certain moments, prove more valuable than a bulging wallet. During periods of economic turbulence, the most powerful kitchen skill is not the ability to purchase more provisions. It is knowing precisely how to arrange whatever you currently possess, so it looks like shortage never crossed your doorstep. Number 2 presents peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. An image exists that proves nearly impossible to detach from the childhood memories of countless millions of Americans. A mother rose before the sun, spreading smooth or crunchy peanut butter across slices of soft bread. She layered on a smear of sweet fruit jelly and pressed the two halves together with gentle care. Zero heating required, zero refrigeration demanded for a handful of hours. By midday, the sandwich remained pleasantly tender, still packed with flavor, and capable of quieting a hungry child. Perhaps that is why this astonishingly simple meal assisted in raising an entire American generation. Peanut butter never occupied the category of luxury food items, and it stores beautifully at room temperature. It is loaded with plant protein and beneficial fats, and a modest smear can keep a person satisfied for a long stretch. Paired with fruit, preserves, the salty and sweet notes counterbalance each other in a way that is practically impossible to forget. Many grown adults cannot recall which flavor of jelly their mother used. They carry instead the distinctive click of the lunchbox latch and the scent when they peeled back the napkin. They recall the lunchroom ritual of bartering half a sandwich for a couple of cookies with a classmate beside them. It was never merely a midday meal. It was stitched into the fabric of childhood itself. Throughout punishing economic stretches, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches kept surfacing inside lunchboxes because they demanded very little cash outlay. Plenty of households maintained backup jars of peanut butter in the pantry because it held steady without spoiling. Another small trick passed from mothers to daughters involved spreading peanut butter across both interior faces of the bread before spooning the jelly into the middle. The peanut butter created a thin, waterproof barrier, stopping the jelly from bleeding into the bread's crumb. Perhaps that is why a peanut butter and jelly sandwich never truly functioned as just a meal. It carried an unspoken message pressed between two slices. A quiet reminder that no matter how much turmoil swirled beyond the front door, there was always a lunchbox packed with attention and care, and there was always someone who wanted you to march off towards school or work carrying a full stomach plus enough energy to begin the day. Number 1 finally brings us to Spam. Spam did not ascend to legendary status because its flavor profile outshone every rival on the shelf. It achieved legendary status because when the broader world was grappling with global warfare, economic wreckage, and widespread supply shortages, that compact rectangular tin was still sitting steady on the shelf, prepared whenever necessity called its name. Zero refrigeration required, zero elaborate cooking procedures, zero specialized storage demands. Just a can opener, a hot skillet surface, and a brief handful of minutes. And in return, you obtained protein, fat, salt, and sufficient caloric energy to power through a full meal. That is the reason why across the span of World War II, Spam was not exclusively discovered inside family kitchens. It trailed behind soldiers, it fueled factory laborers pulling extended shifts, and it sustained entire communities navigating strict food rationing programs. It was never categorized as a delicacy. It was categorized as a guarantee. And during a genuine crisis situation, a guarantee can hold substantially greater worth than flavor alone. A thick slab of Spam deposited onto a hot skillet begins to brown and caramelize around its edges within minutes. The rich, intensely savory aroma floods the kitchen space almost instantaneously. Plate it beside scrambled eggs for the morning meal. Wedge it between 2 slices of bread for the noon sandwich. Dice it into small cubes and fold it through steaming rice for the evening dinner. The identical tin of processed meat can be stretched across multiple distinct meals without demanding a parade of supplementary ingredients. One single can might appear alongside fried eggs at daybreak, tucked between sandwich bread by midday, and scattered through a rice bowl come nightfall, transforming one shelf-stable component into several distinctly different plates. In the present day, plenty of folks might chuckle or wrinkle their nose upon spotting a can of Spam sitting inside someone's pantry. However, those who have personally navigated through lean stretches comprehend its value without requiring any explanation. A food item that endures for years on the shelf, stands ready for use the instant the lid is peeled back, delivers concentrated calories, and meshes effortlessly with virtually any other ingredient will perpetually command a respected spot inside a thoughtfully prepared kitchen. Perhaps that is why Spam has rightfully claimed the #1 position on this list. Not because its taste surpasses every other entry, but because it personifies a brutally practical lesson. During prosperous seasons, individuals select their food based predominantly on what they prefer and what sounds appealing. During punishing seasons, individuals gravitate toward whatever can best assist their families in making it through until tomorrow. And occasionally, genuine peace of mind is not unearthed inside an elaborate multi-course dinner spread. It is located inside a small metal canister, stationed silently in the back of the cupboard, waiting without complaint until the day it is finally called into service. The foods we have walked through today were never designed with the goal of becoming legends. They were engineered with quiet desperation to shepherd ordinary families across brutal stretches, using resourcefulness, patience, and a stubborn refusal to surrender hope. A sack of dried beans, a mound of potatoes, a single tin of Spam, or a humble jar of peanut butter once contributed to raising an entire generation during a period when so many other comforts had been reclassified as unattainable luxuries. Perhaps the most significant takeaway is not a prediction that we will all soon be forced to eat these exact foods again. The deeper lesson is that they nudge us toward appreciating whatever we currently possess, wasting far less of what crosses our kitchen threshold, and approaching preparation with level-headed thinking rather than panic-driven scrambling. I would genuinely enjoy hearing your perspective on this. If you were forced to select only a single item from the entire collection we explored today to keep permanently stocked inside your own kitchen, which specific one would you choose, and what personal reason drives that decision? Please take a moment to tap that like button if this journey through history gave you something valuable to consider, and share your pick in the comments so we can learn from each other's thinking right here on my channel.